Yo, 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 what's that word? This is 3012 Inning Podcast, episode 26. We about to knock it out the park. Now, today we have a little bit of a sombering episode, and this is about the life legacy of Mr. Jim Brown, passed away on May 18th, 2023. This is my first time ever doing kind of one of these episodes, and it required a lot of research, and I'm going to condense it down, some, maybe even a lot. Well, not maybe. This was an incredible man. Positives and negatives combined. We all have positives and negatives. We're going to speak on a lot of those positives and just want to get this out of the way now. There are some negatives that have been reported that he's been charged with but never convicted of, meaning he was found not guilty, or the charges were dropped, and people changed their statements and things of that nature. So I won't touch on any of the reported domestic violence situation, even though Mr. Jim Brown himself has admitted on the record to it. I cannot speak to the specifics of what he might have been referred to due to legally him not being charged for it and being held accountable for it. But he was described as an aloof man, a guy that resisted racism, and we're going to talk about those effects on his life some, and the type of man he was, the type of athlete he was. There's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to go ahead and knock it out the park. Again, you can catch this on YouTube and Spotify. Make sure you guys watch the YouTube episode, though, because in addition to my audio, it's going to be video highlights of an incredible athletic career. So without further ado, we're going to jump right into it. First thing we're going to talk about is Mr. Jim Brown's early life. So he was born February 17th, 1936 in St. Simons, Georgia. So St. Simons was a mixed community of blacks and whites due to the booming lumber industry in the 1800s, the late 1800s, in the 1880s, I believe. So by the time 1924 came around, 8 years before Jim was born, the Brunswick St. Simons Highway, which today is known as the Torres Causeway, was created. This causeway caused a boom to the local economy with tourism, but the island still had a small, permanent community of only a few hundred. So Jim was mostly raised religiously by his great-grandmother after his father, who was a professional boxer, abandoned the family when Jim was only 2 weeks old. His mother, Teresa, was back and forth from New York to Georgia all the time. And again, he was raised that way until he was 8 years old, when his mother, who had secured a job as a maid, could keep Jim full-time as his full-time parent. Jim ended up attending Manhasset High School in Long Island, New York, where he lettered in football, basketball, lacrosse, baseball, and track and field. I think Jim ended up having 15 total letters, anywhere from 10 to 15 total letter in high school. It's incredibly impressive. In his senior year of high school, on the football field, he ran for 15 yards a carry. Be more specific, 14.9, and over 1,000 yards. He averaged 39.6 points per game in basketball. In addition, he threw 2 no-hitters in baseball, and he held the school record in the 100-meter dash. And he also led the lacrosse team to a state championship and being named an all-county player in football and basketball. So I'm just going to be cycling through my notes when you guys hear that little ruffling paper sound. So a little backstory before I begin the part about his college career. Now, in high school, Jim didn't face many racial situations due to the love and affection he got on being that star player. He didn't face it as much as the other minimal amount of African Americans. That's another thing about it. His school was predominantly white, majorly predominantly white, so he didn't see it as much as as others saw it. Now, I will say this. There was a man by the name of Kenneth Malloy, a lawyer from Syracuse, but also a star player that ended up turning the head coach while he was still getting his lawyer degree from Syracuse. Nowadays, we look at stuff like name, image, and likeness. We talk about, before that, we talked about stuff like the bag man and stuff like that. I'm not saying Mr. Malloy was the bag man. And again, he was an all-star lacrosse player, all-American lacrosse player. Sorry, that's like that. Just a great athlete in his own right, but he did have some influence on the decision for Jim to ultimately attend Syracuse University. Reading his autobiography, Mr. Jim Brown, you saw a lot about. I apologize. You saw a lot about how he was made promises from certain universities. Particularly Syracuse, they were promising anything, just a scholarship. He took a visit, fell in love with the school, but the thing about it was none of those were true. He was kind of angled and pushed there by Mr. Malloy and other figures in his life. And once he got there, I'm gonna talk about that in a little bit. Moving on. Again, yes, he wasn't directly recruited by Syracuse because they didn't want black athletes in general. Mr. Malloy's influence on the school caused them to at least admit him under the falsehood of a scholarship, which ultimately Malloy ended up having to pay Jim's first semester of college. In his first year, he was promised to be paid by the school for the second semester of his first year in college. Ultimately, that was false, so Mr. Malloy ended up paying the whole first year of Jim's tuition. Jim's first direct encounters with racism occurred when he went to Syracuse throughout the years. Even as stipulations for being on the team, he had to stay in non-athletic dorms, was warned not to date Caucasian women, and was put in awkward football positions in order to influence him to quit the team. So they were starting to put him in wide receiver, offensive and defensive line, tight end or something like that. Some other position that wasn't what ultimately he was all-county, great high school player. They were doing everything in their power. You can see that in the Jim Brown documentary movie and his reaction to it, and him being literally the only African American on the football team, and how that affected him in the locker room, and sometimes him having to change in different places. It was just a really difficult time all around. He wouldn't become the full-time running back, even though he was clearly the best player on the team. He wouldn't become the full-time running back until his junior season. By his sophomore year, he was the second leading rusher on the team. And in that junior season, he put up 676 yards with averaging 5.2 yards a carry. Jim Brown had a legendary senior season on the football field. He was the first team All-American and came in 5th place in the Heisman Trophy race, which a lot of people have speculated was fueled by racial prejudice. That season, he rushed for 986 yards, which was number 3 in the nation, with Syracuse only playing 8 games. So he's averaging well over 100 yards a game, while also scoring 14 touchdowns. Again, this is only 8 games routinely. People play in college now. If you're good enough, 15 games. Most people play around 13 games. In the last regular season game of his college football career, which he won 16-7 at Colgate, Brown set a school record by scoring 43 points by himself. He scored 6 rushing touchdowns and kicked 7 extra points. So he was also the number 1 running back by this time, but also the number 1 place kicker. In his very last football game at Syracuse, he ran for 132 yards, 3 rushing touchdowns, and kicked 4 extra points, with the last one being blocked, resulting in a 28-27 win by the opposing team, which was Texas Christian University, TCU at the time. So he also played basketball in his sophomore and junior seasons, where he was the second leading scorer on the team. He skipped playing basketball his senior year at Syracuse because Syracuse refused to allow 3 black players to start on the team. Those 2 other players were also very good players. I think they must have invested more time into the program. And it's crazy because a lot of players on that team will tell you they believe they would have won a national championship if, that stipulation wasn't in place, because even without Jim, that team was good enough to make it to the Elite 8 of the NCAA tournament. The thing about it is Jim was so great. Mr. Jim Brown was so great in football, but he was arguably better in lacrosse. He was a 2-time All-American midfielder at Syracuse. He finished second in scoring in the nation. And the modern-day Heisman Trophy version of lacrosse is named after Mr. Jim Brown himself. He is widely regarded as one of the greatest lacrosse players of all time, despite never playing at the professional level. They even had to change rules because of Jim Brown. Before him, what Jim would do a lot of times, he would hold the puck really close to his body. So that allowed him to fully utilize his athleticism to get by other people. And of course, with him being the best athlete on the field at all times, he was able to get by a lot of people, everybody, with the force and grace and elegancy that he had as an athlete. Was always able to score and do whatever he really wanted to do. So they changed that rule where you had to be more loose with the ball. It's unfortunate because later on he never, those type of penalties are never authorized nowadays. So they're clearly put in place for how dominant he was. He had a Shaq-like presence on the lacrosse field, which is incredible. Something that Deion Sanders made famous also when Mr. Jim Brown was at Syracuse was Deion made the double, playing 2 sports in one day. Deion, of course, did it on a professional level, which is, again, unheard of and awesome. But Mr. Jim Brown actually did it in college at Syracuse. Early in the day, he won the high jump and the javelin, and he finished second in the discus on the track and field. And later on in that same day, he led the Syracuse lacrosse team to an 8-6 victory over Army, which completed an undefeated season for the lacrosse team. In 2020, on the last word about his college career, in 2020, he was honored at the college football playoffs as the greatest college player of all time. And that just lets you know the reverence in the sport that people have for him, for a guy that never won the Heisman Trophy, finished only as high as 5th, but he was regarded as the greatest in college football history. Just amazing accomplishment. So next, I'm going to go through this quickly because I believe people should just notice in general is what he's most famous for, his NFL career. So he was picked 6 overall, Paul Horn from Notre Dame, John Arnett from USC, John Brody from Stanford, Ron Kramer from Michigan, and Lynn Dawson from Purdue being picked before him in that, I believe, the 1957 NFL draft. In just his 9th game, he rushed for an NFL record 237 yards, and he broke the single-season rushing record in 1958, rushing for 1,527 yards in only a 12-game season, which destroyed the previous mark of 1,146 yards by Steve Van Buren of the LA Rams. In the first of his 4 MVP seasons, he set the NFL record of 17 touchdowns scored in general, beating his second-place competition, Mr. Raymond Berry of the Baltimore Ravens, by 8, who only scored 8 touchdowns. He scored 17 touchdowns, so what is that? 9 more? He led the Cleveland Browns. The Browns, we know Cleveland history. He led the Cleveland Browns to the 1964 NFL Championship. I believe his last year he retired. They were faced in the conference championship game in the year before they won it to 1963, finishing the conference championship game. He went to the Pro Bowl every year of his 9-season career. That's very important. I want to highlight 9-season career. He led the league in rushing 8 out of 9 years, which is an NFL record. Holds the single-season Cleveland Browns rushing record of 1,863 yards in the 1963 season. Won the most valuable player in 1957, 1958, 1963, and 1965. He has the highest per game rushing average in NFL history of over 104 yards per game. He had 2,500 yards receiving with 20 touchdowns by the end of his career, so definitely a dual threat back. I'm going to say this a lot coming up now about NFL records, but he has the NFL records for most seasons of leading the league in all-purpose yards with 5. He was the first person to rush for over 10,000 yards, finishing his career with 12,312 yards, which was an NFL record at the time, an NFL record holder for rushing touchdowns with 106. He holds the NFL record for all-purpose touchdowns with 126 and all-purpose yards with 15,549. Now, I also want to say he actually won it. I think in 1983 he was discussing coming back post his retirement because players were getting close. I think Franco Harris was getting close to his total rushing marks. And he had some remarks to say about it, about how he thought Franco didn't deserve it because he ran out of bounds and all that stuff. And again, on the highlight tapes that is playing on the screen, you'll see a lot of him not running out of bounds, going into crowds, and ultimately that affecting his career. Again, if you go listen to his biography, he talks about the injuries, but never showing them, and generally being, the machismo tough guy. But, it's debatable in the sense, if somebody wants to preserve their career in their mind for later on. But at the end of the day, that's just how he felt about it, that a running back shouldn't run out of bounds and they will fight for every inch. And in a way, you got to respect that too. So back to talking about his NFL career. He was voted to the NFL's 50th, 75th, and 100th anniversary all-time team. And pre the career of Tom Brady, he was widely regarded as the greatest football player of all time. We all know Tom Brady, 7 or 8 championships. It's hard to top that, especially at the quarterback position, and Brady leading most statistical categories at that position. But Jim Brown is definitely always is going to be cemented as a top 5 NFL player at all time. After a disagreement with Brown's ownership, he retired in his prime at 29 to begin an acting career. So he retired in his prime. He retired on top. He went out like Peyton, going out on top. You got to respect it. At 29, he had still years ahead of him, and he began his acting career. So alongside the legendary Sidney Poitier, Jim Brown is recognized as one of the pioneers of black actors. He got his first acting role in 1964, and he finally got his first lead role in 1968, starring in the film Ice Station Zebra. A lot of research I did about his movie career. Mr. Jim Brown was known as like the first black action movie star, black superhero, black Superman, and all this. But I think that's just a little slight they be trying to give him about not being a great actor. But his movies all had a lot of commercial success. Like the film I'm about to talk about right now, which is 100 Rifles. He ended up getting paid $200,000 for the movie, which is massive at the time. But also, in addition to proceed having 5% of the ownership stake of the box office revenue from the movie, which made him one of the highest paid actors in Hollywood. So a little bit more about 100 Rifles. That movie is also famous for Mr. Jim Brown being the first black actor with an interracial love scene that included him and actor Rachel Welch, which was monumental at the time. He talked about it in an interview where, you know, he kept trying to go in, he kissed her on the head and stuff like that, and she wasn't necessarily, she was saying her head was really sensitive, so it was cueing him on to, okay, you know, lips have to touch in this scene. And he talked about how nervous he was in the biography and stuff like that, because obviously this is a huge monumental moment at the time. And so if you ever get the time, you should go back and watch it. Like I said, they say my boy wasn't a great actor, but he did his thing. So game recognized game. Jim ended up earning 23 lead roles between TV and movies, and he has over 50 acting credits to his name, which is very impressive. Again, to a person that was doing this cold turkey, he didn't come up on the acting circuit. He was doing this off the strength of, this is something I just want to do, which I respect. At 29, just to say, you know what, I'm going to do a whole new career. In a not easy career, I'm going to jump into acting. That's extremely impressive. Now, arguably most important to me about this man's life was the fact that he was a major civil rights activist. So this civil rights nature sort of came about when he was at Syracuse, and he became more distant from people due to all the racism and things like that he faced at Syracuse. And he was part of some very prominent movements in the civil rights movement. One in particular was the Cleveland Summit, which occurred on June 4th, 1967. He himself organized it. Other famous black athletes at the time who attended the summit were Muhammad Ali, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Walter Beach, Willie Davis, Curtis McMillan, Bobby Mitchell, Jim Shorter, Carl Stokes, Sidney Williams, John Wooden, and of course the legendary, late, great Bill Russell. I might make a video about him. Before I move on, again, you guys subscribe to the podcast, like, comment, share this video, get it out there. It really helps out the algorithm, pushes out there to people that need to hear this quality information about major figures in the sports, civil rights, and acting industry. Again, you guys visit my website, Hattie's Collection LLC, for the new stuff we're going to be dropping soon. Support me. It really helps, and I appreciate y'all. So back to the video. 1966, after this Cleveland Summit, which I want to talk a little bit about that. That Cleveland Summit was based on, some people believe it was around trying to convince Muhammad Ali, who was refusing the draft, the military draft for a Vietnam War, on the basis of his religion. Now, this was legal, but the thing about it was people didn't respect it. He was known as a pariah at the time. The World Heavyweight Champion refusing to go. You know, he was facing up to 5 years in prison. And a lot of people argue that these 5 years, I think he was out of competition for 3 years. Muhammad Ali, that sucked the prime away from his career. When he came back, he was still a great fighter, but a different fighter. So, back to the subject. In 1966, he founded the Black Economic Union, the BEU. This organization was around to help promote opportunities for minority-owned businesses. The BEU secured loans and grants for community initiatives, amongst other things. In 1988, he also founded the Mayor I Can Foundation, which targeted Los Angeles gangs by teaching them life skills and organizing truces and peace treaties. Most notably, the 1992 Watts Truce between the Bloods and Crips. Another thing about it is, with his foundation, he had gang leaders going to prison, talking to the prisoners about when they get out, about how to change their life around, even if they maintain their membership in the organization, just to be more focused on becoming better men overall for their families, so they wouldn't have to spend, the rest of their life really essentially in prison. And it was oftentimes Jim would meet with very important figures, and people would walk through his halls and they'd see famous gang leaders on the LA streets in meeting rooms in his house, in and out of his house. talks about this a lot in the biography, how close he was to the notable gang leaders of that time. It's very eye-opening. So with that, like, you see a man that lived a full life, great high school career, great college career, great pro career, multiple phases, whether that's acting, activism, or NFL. He did his thing, and even lacrosse right now, he had an ownership in the lacrosse team in the pro league. So he was starting to become more present in the cross space in the last remaining decade of his life. And, just an incredible guy, acting career that spanned 30 years, 50 acting credits. That's incredible for anybody, especially a novice at the age of 29. So I just want to provide some context on the career and life of Mr. Jim Brown. He passed away May the 18th, 2023. I think he deserved his flowers. I didn't see much. I expected to see more about him due to the icon and the titan he was in the business. I think a lot of people were afraid to say something about it due to the domestic violence allegations. I do take that serious. I grew up in a household where I witnessed domestic violence. But I think context matters in all situations. And I'll leave that at that for y'all research, y'all sell those situations. But I think that's the reason why, and I just want to give him his flowers. I want to say rest in peace, Mr. Jim Brown. I want to thank y'all for listening. And please, y'all like, comment, subscribe. I appreciate